Hello and welcome everybody to this Monday afternoon Bok News show. It's a wonderful Monday afternoon, of course, if you're a Bok fan. South Africa overcoming Ireland at Loftus by 27 points to 20. And watching that game, I must say, the Boks did start well. It looked nervy at times, but we pulled through by 27 points to 20. And Rassie Erasmus gets his first victory over the Irish. In fact, and our first victory as South Africa over Ireland since 2016. Before I do go any further, please do like, subscribe to the channel here on Forever Sports. We're taking you on this journey every step of the way. Of course, we have another game to look forward to in Durban for the second test for South Africa to seal the series. But a lot to talk about. It was a very, very interesting game, pulsating stuff. The intensity one would expect from number 1 and 2 in the world. And it certainly delivered. The Loftus crowd, of course, with faithful as ever, packed to the rafters just about. And who can go any further than start with the wonderful, wonderful rendition of the South African national anthem. One I haven't heard in a long time. Of course, every single national anthem is special, but this one, where the crowd actually got involved and sang the last bit of the anthem, it just gave you that feeling that something great was about to happen. And as I mentioned, as a South African fan, something great, in fact, did happen. It was definitely an intense game. Of course, earlier on in the morning, we saw the All Blacks and England showdown. That was an intense game. The All Blacks overcoming England by a single point, 16 points to 15. And as I mentioned, it was Rassie's first victory over the Irish. Keep in mind, we lost in the World Cup by 13 points to 8 against Ireland, who Ireland thought they would go on and challenge for the World Cup. But that's all said and done. This was the one that was going to decide it. The intensity of it all was on display, no doubt. And of course, as we know, South Africa renowned for their power play, their physicality. But in fact, we saw something slightly different from the Springboks. I'll be interested to hear from you as the fans. Do give your comments as well, your questions, if you have any, on what your interpretation was of the game and how you thought it panned out. South Africa, of course, coming away with the victory. But as I mentioned, Tony Brown, heavily influenced in that game. You could see it in the opening exchanges. And of course, early on, it was that wonderful shift down the blind side with Pieter-Steph du Toit down the trams, opening it up. And then we saw the ball shift wide, and it was the guy that perhaps, in my opinion, didn't get the credit up until the World Cup last year, and that was Jesse Kriel for his influence in this Springbok team. He's really become a stalwart after playing second fiddle to the likes of Lukhanyo for a large part of Rassie's tenure. You can see the maturity coming through of Jesse Kriel, running a wonderful line. And then, of course, pinning the defender at the moment where it mattered. And that takes a lot of skill, folks. It's not something we're used to seeing from the Springboks, shifting the ball left and right, creating space. And for the most part, we did have the physicality, but that first try early on was definitely an indication that Tony Brown is working very hard behind the scenes with the Boks. And wouldn't it be wonderful to see with the Springboks and all the tools they have in their arsenal, exactly adding something, a new layer, should I say, in my opinion, with attacking prowess. It gives the All Blacks and any other team on the international stage some fright, no doubt, if the Springboks can put that together. As I mentioned, it was early try for Kurt Lee Arendse and converted by Handré Pollard, and the Springboks were up and running. There was an intense physical battle at the breakdown, in my opinion, which saw a lot of to and fro. I think Ireland, for the most part, did a lot to aggravate the Springboks at breakdown, not allowing them quick, easy ball, disrupting things there. So it was quite a tough day at the office for the likes of Faf de Klerk to really get that clean ball, but you wouldn't expect anything less in my opinion, from the number 2 side in the world. South Africa, of course, playing in their white kit, no doubt, the green and gold in their heart. After that try from Currie Arendse, there were a couple of penalties that were exchanged, and the Springboks were away. Ireland, of course, did get a try of their own. And the thing for me about, I think, the contentious issue around everything, for that matter, would be the influence of the TMO. And the TMO, for the most part, we've seen they're coming more and more into the game. I think a lot of people would debate on the one side, they'd like to see less of the TMO. And on the other side, would like to see a little bit more where decisions are as accurate as possible. The one part that I do want to mention, of course, coming back to South Africa, and we give Manie Libbok perhaps a hard time in terms of his goal kicking, but the same can be said now about Handré Pollard, although we don't want to throw him away. He had a really off day with the boot. South Africa left some points out there, and one feels that if he got those goals, it might have been slightly different psychologically, especially the one going into halftime. But South Africa deservedly taking the lead. In fact, the score at halftime was 13 points to 8. Jack Crowley missing a conversion. They did get a try and a penalty of their own. Then we come back to the TMO, and as I mentioned, it was the TMO influenced the game in many ways, and in many regards, I guess some pundits would say that it was in favour of the Springboks. On one occasion, Caelan Doris had his try disallowed. And what we want to see, I guess, if it goes up to the TMO, is just a quick, concise, clear decision. And we don't want to see them mulling over it. So for that one of Caelan Doris, I think there was definitely a clear indication that the ball was short and the Springboks were spared on that occasion. But that first half, definitely after starting, in my opinion, on a very fast note, no doubt it did taper off, but South Africa could feel that the Irish are not going to go away. In fact, as I mentioned at the breakdown, they were very resilient, but the back line speed on defence was also the difference. Ireland on one occasion were camping 5 meters from the South African try line. And unfortunately, on one occasion, it was Joe McCarthy who took a quick ball, or short ball, should I say, and he couldn't hold on. And South Africa really defensively did put on the pressure and did well to keep Ireland at bay. I think we look at the TMO again, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. I'd love to hear your opinion. But we look at the disallowed try from James Lowe, who went running the length of the field. And again, Pollard there, I don't want to throw him under the bus, but defensively at the last line of defense, made a really poor attempt. But you also, as I mentioned, Manie Libbok cops a lot of criticism, I guess, from the public. And as South Africans, we are quite harsh when it comes to the standard that we want to see. We must remember that Handré Pollard did, in fact, win us the World Cup, or was a major influence in us winning the World Cup in those knockout stages. So I don't foresee Rassie necessarily putting him aside and making irrational changes. I think the goal kicking most certainly is something that he can improve on and has to improve on in the second test. We can't afford to drop any points. Ireland, no doubt, even though they lost by 7 points, would feel that they are in with a real chance to level the series. But Handré Pollard, no doubt, there just making an error on defense. And I think maybe he's still trying to fit in my opinion, to this attacking play of Tony Brown. It's not all going to happen in one game. Keep in mind that Ireland, of course, have had the whole Six Nations to be together. But one major talking point, I guess, for the Irish was the loss of Jamison Gibson-Park for the series. I think Craig Casey, for the most part, a wonderful backup to Gibson-Park, but you could just sense his intensity and his speed at ruck time, and decision-making was definitely missing for the Irish. But South Africa, no doubt, did well in the game to control matters for the most part, besides the losing of points by Pollard. And then just coming back, as I mentioned, to the TMO of James Lowe and his try. In terms of the letter of the law, I think, in my opinion, it was no doubt played on the ground. We saw Ronan Kelleher being called back, or the TMO calling the referee back after the try was awarded, to make an indication that the ball was played on the ground. Whether he knew about it or not, I think is actually irrelevant. His knee was on the ground. Where his foot was, I don't think that matters. And that's just my opinion. I think a lot of people will debate about it. It would have had a major influence on the game, of course, at that time, but it was definitely, for me, in my opinion, the correct call by the TMO. Slightly a natural bias as a South African fan, but you got to play to the letter of the law, and I think they got that call right. We look at the penalty kick, as I mentioned, by Pollard before halftime. You want to take the points where it matters, and to drop that relatively easy kick, in my opinion, just before halftime was really, really tough. But the Springboks managed to have that resilience. We saw the likes, as I mentioned, of Peter Steph du Toit, Siya Kolisi having a strong game, carrying the ball, but also featuring in the trams, which is not something we used to see when the Boks shift the ball wide. So it's wonderful to see that sort of influence, the Springboks being able to move the ball. I think the whole trend, before South Africa would generally follow the trend, we are creating and setting the trend at the moment, whether it be with that play. Now, other teams are going to have a look at that, and I'm sure make a few notes of their own. Of course, as I mentioned, the Irish were resilient, and South Africa, coming back again to the TMO, had an opportunity that went in their favour, some would say, but it was a very, very close call with the Pollard clearance kick, penalty kick to touch, and James Lowe trying to keep the ball in field. For the most part, did his best. But then just on that moment that the ball left his hands, Cheslin Colby, who other than him, we saw him do it against the French, chasing down Thomas Ramos's conversion to save South Africa 2 points. And he's always, always ready to chase down. And that's the sign of a world-class player. Cheslin Colby then booting the ball ahead, going over for the score and giving South Africa some breathing room at that point. I just want to chime in here. Johan Rugby says our forwards must link more with the backs by pulling the ball out of the back. Our running lines into gaps can also improve. I hear you, Johan. The problem is as well, Ireland, most certainly with the likes of Robbie Henshaw there, definitely on defence, were sound. And that's the interesting part. It's not just about the attack, but it's about the defense as well, how you can break down the defense with the attack play that you implement. And I think that's where Tony Brown most certainly has an influence. And a lot of talk, I guess, has been around the bomb squad for quite some time now, over the last couple of months when South Africa introduced it, as I mentioned, setting the trend there. Some pundits calling for the fact that it should be abolished and we shouldn't have that sort of thing. In my opinion, again, this is just my opinion watching rugby. If you've got 8 substitutions, you should be allowed to use them as and when you wish. And for South Africa's sake, they decided to bring on all their forwards at one given time. And to their detriment, that first scrum penalty went against them. So Ireland might have felt they had a psychological advantage. But again, coming back to it, a lot of people are talking about the fact that the bomb squad can cause injuries to players who are already fatigued. But then again, in my opinion, as I said, that just comes down to the fact that perhaps you should look at your own luxury of the bench that you have, because every team can do exactly the same thing. So it's a contentious one, but as I understand it, they're going to have some sort of conference, World Rugby, to talk about these matters later on in the year. But as I see it, it's going to be, or it's going to stay the same, because you have your 8 substitutions. You go 5-3. Some teams do 5-3, 6-2, 7-1 split. Do a 8-0 split if you want. I think if you have the luxury to do it and it's within the law, then you want to do everything you can. Remember, this is an international stage. There's obviously talk of it filtering down to the lower levels. But again, at international level, you've got to do everything you can to win a test match. And Rassie has figured it out. We know that he's a master of implementing his own plans. And the bomb squad, in my opinion, is South Africa's DNA at the moment, because we brought them on. And there were instances, I guess, in the game where perhaps it does defragment a little bit. But in terms of that freshness, we saw Malcolm Marx making an appearance, having his influence on the game with a couple of steals as well. And then I guess the likes of Kwagga Smith had to settle in at number 8, dropping a few balls. But no doubt, a player that came into his own, in my opinion, as the game went on. We look forward to Durban next weekend, or this coming Saturday, and it's all to play for. It will be interesting to see, of course, South Africa, after winning that game by 27 points to 20, if they would make any changes. I don't foresee any injuries on the South African side, as I understand it. For Ireland, Craig Casey is in doubt after taking a head knock, and of course Robbie Henshaw as well. So they might be a little bit more depleted. So South Africa could in fact wrap up the series there. The wonderful thing about South Africa at the moment is we're also bleeding young players to come through. The likes of Sasha Feinberg and Gomezulu, who came on towards the end, not really having much of an impact, but just getting that taste of the intensity of this sort of rugby game. It's not your general South Africa game. The game against Wales, of course, we saw Sasha get a little bit more time. But against the Irish, we saw they never went away, scoring a couple of soft tries, in my opinion, towards the end of the game. But South Africa managed to do just enough. So that's the contention was definitely, for me, and will be debated for a long time to come, especially the one with James Lowe trying to keep the ball in play. They're perhaps wondering if there wasn't another angle that they could look at if the ball did in fact leave the right hand, or if it was still in his hand when his foot touched the line. But the TMO again has the final call. And just listening to the Irish pundits, I guess they definitely felt that South Africa deserved the victory. So it's one of those games where the margins were very small. As I mentioned, the only thing we'll look to clear up come Durban would be definitely the efficiency and accuracy at goal kicking. Andre Pollard was a little bit fortuitous there with that Colby try, kicking into touch. You want to eliminate those unforced errors, I guess, because that's something that you can fix. So in terms of changes, South Africa, in my opinion, I don't see too many. Perhaps the only way, or the only place I can see some changes happening, would be in the front row, just for rotational purposes. But I think they'll still stick to the 6-2 split. And then as Tony Brown gets more time with the box, the influence that he has, that we've already seen, can only grow from strength to strength. So shout out to Jesse Creel, of course. The man of the match, definitely showed how he's able to carry the ball nicely, also pick up the defenders and know exactly when. It's a very particular position outside centre. As I said, he's grown into it. We know the quality of Lukhanyo but Jesse Creel no doubt deserved that man of the match. Him and the likes of Peter Steph Tutor, who just kept running all day long. And again, unlikely on the sidelines, running with the ball, throwing it off in one hand. That's definitely enterprising play from the box. Another worth mention is the likes of Franco Mostert, who tackled all afternoon. And South Africa as a unit, as I mentioned, it's only their second game in the international season. And I think the only area where it was a little bit of a challenge for us was at the breakdown. And I see here WLK says we have to clean up at the rucks. Faf was under pressure because we didn't clean the rucks fast enough. The All Blacks have incredible ruck speed. If we can get quicker ruck speed, we can dominate. You've taken the words right out of my mouth. I'm thinking exactly what you're thinking. It was a little bit disruptive, and South Africa would like a little bit more ball security, but also be able to get the ball out quicker so that we can utilize this enterprising play that we've seen. But for the most part, it was a really, really entertaining, pulsating game of the highest quality. Perhaps not the game that we saw in the likes of South Africa and France in the quarterfinal, but right up there. And South Africa, remember, take the victory. And that's the most important thing. Psychologically, we needed to get that one in the bag so that the Irish can just calm down just a little bit. And as a South African fan, I'm proud we did that. 7 points to the good South Africa. It will be interesting to see in terms of the Durban game which route South Africa take. But no doubt Rassie's not planning one game at a time. He's always one step ahead. And there might just be one or two changes in terms of rotation there. The bomb squad, the TMO, points of contention, but the national anthem stole the show, of course, in and among South Africa's victory. It was an absolutely, simply sensational game. And South Africa and Rassie Erasmus are underway against Ireland after their first, or should I say their first victory since 2016. And that, no doubt, will give them a lot of composure coming to Durban, knowing that the media, everybody that has something to say can just quieten down just a little bit. But South Africa across the board, whether you're South African or Irish, for the most part, the feedback was that South Africa deserved to win. It's been an absolute pleasure to take you through this one. We look forward to the game on Saturday, and it's Springboks, green and gold, or if you want to call it white and turquoise. When playing against Ireland, the green and gold is in our heart. It was a spectacular game, and we look forward to that one. From myself, Ruudz, here at Forever Sports and Forever Rugby. Before I go any further, in fact, the bomb squad, let's not just talk about the contentious issue, let's talk about that last scrum and penalty try. How could I miss that one? So Ireland were completely obliterated, and that's the moments where you also can define a test match show, showing South Africa or showing the world exactly why we make the decisions we make. Before I go any further, Sergio Benjamin says, SA played a great game. My only concern with their ruck speed and struggling to convert pressure to points. Lastly, I felt like South Africa thought they already won it in the first 10 minutes and defended a bit poor. I do want to say I kind of agree with you, Sergio, there. South Africa started off like a house on fire, but realized that Ireland are no slouches. They're the second best team in the world, and they found their composure and got into the game as well. So it was never going to be an easy game. I think we just, perhaps as South African fans, expected just a little bit too much too soon. But there's promising signs there. South Africa's attacking. When last have we seen that? The penalty try with the scrum, we see that every other day, twice on a Sunday. But it's for the world to stand up, take note, and perhaps implement into their own game if they want to, because South Africa's definitely the trendsetters at the moment. It gives me a great pleasure to say to you, until next time, from myself, Ruudz, here on Forever Rugby and Forever Sports, Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Bye for now.